next presentation, our next presenter is James Mathias. He is the CCO at EllisLab. He is responsible for giving us much more improved and continuing to improve user experience in the ExpressionEngine control panel. So please help me welcome James Mathias.
Can you guys hear me? Excellent. That's not me. That's David Letterman. I did that as a joke with Kevin Cupp, and then I kept doing it as a joke with the conference people, and they didn't like it, but I spent a lot of time photoshopping that, so. That's the real me. As he said, I'm James Mathias. I'm the CCO at EllisLab, not EllisLabs. A lot of people still call us EllisLabs. Stop doing that. Also, I'm a father, husband, gamer, thrower. You might have seen me throwing a yo-yo around. Artist, writer, and outlaw, which is something I came up with 10 or 15 years ago because I'm an idiot. I also really like The Karate Kid. So what do I actually do at EllisLab? Because I do more than, Chief Creative Officer is kind of like a anomalous executive title, and it sounds really powerful, but really the day-to-day for me is a lot of design. So I do experience design, interface design, marketing design, just about anything you see come out of EllisLab that has any design element to it. I either approved or did the actual work myself. And then I do the front-end code for ExpressionEngine and the websites, HTML, CSS, and some jQuery. I'm sorry, Jordan. I know you don't like jQuery. I think jQuery is pretty cool. It helps dumb guys like me do cool stuff. But today's talk is about a user experience, so let's talk about that a little bit. For me, user experience is more than just a job title. It's more than just one person's job. I think when I first got started on the internet, we were just designers or developers, or we were designer developers. And we got to a point where there were people who had jobs like content strategy, SEO marketers and stuff, and we had people that were doing research and usability testing, and we didn't really have titles for those people, not good titles. So we made up a title, user experience designer or UX designer, and you can find UX designers everywhere. You can apply for UX designers jobs at every company in the world, and every single company defines that job differently. So it's once again become a bucket that we just put a lot of different people's jobs into, usability testers, user researchers, things of that nature. But user experience really is everyone's responsibility in the company. Everybody in the company should be working on user experience from beginning to end, from launch, or from discovery to launch. Every part of every project you work on should have user experience as its core. Because at the end of the day, the user doesn't get to see all of the pretty code you've written. It doesn't get to see all of the cool breakthroughs you made and all of the neat comments you've put in the code, unless they're like a lot of people in this room and myself, a huge nerd, and then goes reading those things. They see the final product. They see the visuals. They see how does this work from beginning to end. So I like to make sure that everybody understands in the company at EllisLab that user experience is a big, key, core component of what we do from beginning to end. So it's not just me sitting in a room going, this is how this is going to work. It's all of us talking about how this is going to work, and making sure that every step of the way, when I've handed off the front-end templates and the design, that the developers, when they're implementing those into the product, they come back to me and they say, hey, I noticed that when this happens, what do you want to occur? I said, all right, I'll take that as a drink break. That's all right, I get really bad dry mouth. You guys are so beautiful and you make me nervous. Okay. So this is fun. So user experience is everyone's responsibility, is basically what I'm trying to tell you. You might have the job title user experience designer, but that's your ego, right? That's not a real thing. You're a designer. You're designing things, but everybody in the company, everybody involved in the product should care about user experience and should be using you as a resource, using their own knowledge, their own gut, all of the data you collect to make sure that the user experience at every step of the way is complete. I really don't like it when people say, that's not my job. It's your job. It's everyone's job. This is a quote that I really like from Kurt Vonnegut. We are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be. And it just helps me, reminds me to keep my ego in check and understand that when you put a lot of bravado forward and you pretend to be something you're not, you end up becoming that thing, and nobody wants to be a jerk, right? So just be careful. Always think about, in UX, if you're thinking about the user's experience, you're putting someone else first. You're putting yourself second. And your designs, you might put out a design and some customer will come back and say, this is terrible, this doesn't work well. I've heard that before. And you know what? Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, but it's always good to listen to them. So let's talk about a little bit about what I believe about. This will help frame how I work on ExpressionEngine and the websites. These are my beliefs that I've cultivated over the years doing this. I believe that process is 80% of the work, production is 20% of the work. So I spend 80% of my time just thinking things through, and 20% of my time actually writing code or doing mock-ups or sketches. Anything that's going to be presented or produced. For instance, this, excuse me. I had Chipotle. I thought about this and I wrote this, took me 80% of the time, and then making the slides and like getting the keynote together is 20% of the time. And that goes for everything. And then I brought my friend in, Ron Perlman, to help me with some stuff. Tips from Ron. Document first because it saves time. So whenever I'm going to create something, and this is more of a front-end code kind of thing, whenever I'm going to create a new element or a new UI thing, I document what I want to build first, because then it helps drive like maybe the classes and the markup. And I end up saving time, because if I just go in and say, well, I'm making a button, I'll just call it this, and then later down the road I need that button to do something that it can't do, I've lost a little bit of time. I gotta fix that. This one probably, be mad at Ron if you're mad at anybody about this one. Tools are a preference. So a lot of people get mired in talking about less versus SAS, or gulp versus grunt, or whatever else the fancy kids are using these days. I say just use the tool that works until it stops working, and then use a new tool. It's all a preference. Nobody should be getting into fights about that. That's just something I believe. That's something that Ron wants you to know. Trends are a detriment. And I don't mean trends are bad. I just mean if you spend a lot of your time thinking about how's everybody else doing this, how am I going to move this forward so that it's modern? Nothing's modern, because as soon as you build it and launch it, it's no longer modern, it's present. So you just have to keep in mind when you're building stuff that just because everybody's doing a sidebar on the left with a cool little icon bar over there, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the right choice for your product or the right choice for your thing. And it's okay to think outside of the box, and it's okay to do things that not everybody else is doing. And then the last one, Ron didn't want anything to do with this, so I got Gary Busey to help me. Oh, Gary. Gary Busey's face is ridiculous. All right. All feedback has value, and that's true, and it's not just feedback from your team or your clients or your customers, but even from, when I used to work at Paramore Red, which is now Paramore Digital, we had a traffic manager named Lindy Knox, and she didn't know anything about the internet. She only knew how to schedule our work, sort of. And I would always take my designs to her first before I take them to the other designers, because she didn't know anything about the internet. So if she could give me some feedback that was valuable, that I could fix something that was wrong from a layperson's point of view before I took it to the other designers or the developers, it was invaluable. So I never, ever dismiss any feedback from anyone, ever. My 11-year-old kid asked me, how many Garys are there? When I showed him this slide. He just thought per meant there was several Garys. He didn't realize that's an old-timey way to do it. But I left it because I think it's funny. It's still very funny. Anyways, all feedback has value. I think that's a very important thing to remember when you're building anything. A lot of these beliefs have come back to the core of how much is your own ego getting involved in the decisions you're making. And in some places, in some corporations, like when I worked for Amazon, we had the benefit of really robust user testing and eye tracking and click tracking and being able to sit with users and have them blind test things that you're doing. And that data is amazing. That data is great. But you don't always have that data, and you can't always afford to get that data. So sometimes you just need to get feedback from people sitting next to you, or from your customer base in general. And even if the feedback hurts your feelings, or it makes you feel like you aren't worth anything and you need to go sit under a rock and cry for a little while, it's okay, because as long as you understand that feedback has value, you can move yourself forward and you can move your product forward. And then the last belief I have is that design is organic. And what I mean by that is not that it costs more at the grocery store, because it doesn't, that's ridiculous. It's that it grows over time. So when you have, I don't know how many people have noticed, but in version 3 of the control panel, and even the first iteration of our website, ExpressionEngine.com, the design was different. Not very different, but slightly different. And if you look at screenshots side by side, which I didn't have the foresight to take any, I also didn't feel like installing Expression Engine 3. I've moved on. If you look at them side by side, you can see that they've changed. And it's because the design, and we call it iteration, but it's an organism. It's organic. Some people will change their designs very dramatically. Other people will change them just slightly. And I've taken the tact of changing them slightly over time so that hopefully you don't notice too much and you don't get lost and you don't go, well, now everything's different. Where do I click? But you get an improved experience over time. So that's organic design. And then we talked to Mr. Salvador Dali. I spent a lot of time on these drawings. So I'm just going to let it sit there for a little bit, because I feel like that one's pretty good, right? That's a pretty good one. All right. I was proud of it. I got a Wacom tablet recently. Those who do not want to imitate anything produce nothing. I have no idea if Salvador Dali even actually said this. He gets a lot of stuff attributed to him that he probably didn't say, but people are like, that guy was a weirdo, look at his mustache. He must have said that weird thing. But I don't know if it matters if he said this or not, because it's a really good point, especially for our industry, because a lot of us, myself especially, spend a lot of time thinking, I don't want to use somebody else's work. I don't want to do this thing. I want to try to push this forward on my own with my own thoughts, my own original ideas. But that gets me nowhere, because I don't produce anything. I don't launch anything, because I'm constantly doubting myself and second-guessing myself. So what I have to do is understand that some people, some way smarter than me people, have already solved a lot of the problems that I'm encountering in my day-to-day job. And so if I just take that solution and adapt it to make it my own, then I can move forward faster. And now we're going to get to the meat of the thing, or at least the part where I'm going to talk the most. Sorry, I'm talking a lot already. My process. And this process is really obvious, and I think a lot of people are just going to like roll their eyes at me. But listen, think, act. And this goes back to the 80-20 principle. Listen and think are 80%, and they loop back and forth because you listen to the problem, you listen to the stakeholders, you listen to me drink some water. And then you think about it. You might be thinking about it at the exact same time that people are listening, and you're questioning, and you're going in that loop, listen, think. And then you act. And the action can be making wireframes, writing up reports, designing things in Sketch or Photoshop or Illustrator, or just on paper, wherever you want to design things. It can be writing code, it can be any number of things, but it's all production. So what I like to do is I like to listen to people. I like to really hear what they're saying. I like to get most of my feedback firsthand, either directly from the person who has the feedback. I don't like getting it third hand because of game of telephone. I especially don't like hearing it through the grapevine. So if you have feedback, definitely just come straight to me, and I always listen and I always consider it. And a lot of people that have given me feedback can see that directly in the application and on the website. I know that the two people looking at their laptop, everybody hated that. Took me a long time to find a better picture, but we fixed that, you know. That's better now. More outdoorsy. So listen, think, act. And then my order of priority, I think this is more important than what my process is, but my order of priority when going through this process is as follows. The user's experience is number one, always. Whether the browser can support what we want to build is number two. Semantics is number three, and pomp and circumstance is number four. Because if you have something that does a cool animation, if it ruins any of those first three things, it makes no difference. It's pomp and circumstance. It's terrible. Get rid of it. Kick it out of the project. If it passes those first three tests, though, animate your life away. It's going to be fun times for you and your users. So what is some methodologies that I work with when I'm working through these things, when I'm working through my process? One of the first things I use, and I forgot to attribute the original, but 9 states. I don't know how many people know about this, but there's a methodology called 9 states, and I've adapted it a little bit to our product because our product has some additional states, but I just went with the 9 here to talk about. So 9 states is basically when you're developing a new UI for something, it's going to have, theoretically, 9 different states that it can appear in. So first run would be the first time somebody uses your application, they just installed it, there's no data in it, they're just coming to this element, to this UI element, this one element for the first time. Loading would be if they've tried to search for something with that UI element, they might see a loading screen or a loading state. Empty is not the first run, it's similar, but first run might give them some instructions on how to get data in. Empty is just, they've already gone through the first run, but there's no data. Or no data is being returned from the loading state or something of that nature. And then you go through one, some, and too many. So one thing, one item, some items, too many items. So you can see what that's going to look like when you've got, and too many can also be, and I don't know how many people test this in their UI, but I always make sure to test really long strings. So if it's going to break, I can handle that. And then wrong, which is like an invalid state, right, which is a success state, and done, which is the UI element doesn't need any more input from the user. And if anybody wants more information on this, I can get you the link after this. I should have put it on this slide, but I'm a dum-dum. So 9 states is a large part of my process when I'm actually doing production and I'm creating the new UI elements, because I can create all 9 states for, say, like a text area in one template and hand that off to the development team, and then they know, okay, so the first time somebody comes to this text area, this is what that's going to look like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The next thing I do is unit tests, and this is design unit tests. It's more manual than code unit tests. Code unit tests can be something where you just go through those things with the code. These ones you have to visually check and do a manual check. So whenever you create a new UI element, you ask yourself and you test this UI element against these different tests. So reusable, is this UI element reusable? Is this something that's only going to be used in this one location, or can I reuse this throughout the app in different contexts? State and interactivity, those go back to the 9 states. Clarity, is it clear what this does? Is this a clear, like the mechanics of it? If somebody knows they got to click there, is that clear? Is it responsive? And that, you really only care about that in the responsive design world. So is it responsive? Can it collapse and still look good? And then is it accessible? And that's for people who need accessibility, accessibility testing and whatnot. I'm sorry, my mouth is getting very, very dry. All right. And then the last thing that I use is inverse triangle CSS. So this is basically the methodology behind this is that you chunk all of your CSS into single units. And then you put those units into different categories depending on how much specificity they have on the document. So settings are global. They are things that you're going to use throughout the whole document. And overrides are very, very specific. So you go down through there. So you've got tools, and tools are going to be things like mix-ins, like if you want for a rounded corner mix-in or something like that. And then your resets are going to be like your browser normalizations. Your elements are going to be, and I leave this elements folder empty most of the time because I feel like it's getting a little too specific, but if you want to just make all your paragraphs look the same, you'd put them in this folder. And then patterns are going to be things that are a scope of a UI element that's the full UI element. So a module or a pattern might be like a module. Modifiers are going to be things that modify those patterns, and states are things that modify the state of the patterns. And then overrides are very, very specific. Overrides is the only place that you would use the important declaration. But I use this so that when I have to make a new UI element, I know exactly where it's going to go in the code. I don't have to think through it. I know if it's a pattern, a modifier, a state, an element, and I put it there. And then when the code compiles from top to bottom, least specific to most specific. And then that way the cascade works, and I don't have to really put a lot of time and effort into figuring out, where does this fit in, and do I already have something that does this? I already know if I already have something that does this, and I can modify that. It's just helped my workflow tremendously. I guess I only have a half hour of stuff to talk about. Sorry, guys. I thought that would take me longer. We'll have more time for questions. So I watched this Avett Brothers in closing. I watched this Avett Brothers. I drew Seth Avett. I don't know if anybody knows who that is. I watched this documentary, and at the end, he started singing this song, Life's a Drama, just one period, all kinds of commas. And it really struck me because I think about death a lot. But it also struck me because it's a lot like drama is one of those things where when you think about it, you go, oh, that's so much drama. I don't want all the drama. But drama's a lot like the color black. And that's a misnomer because black's not a color. It's all the colors. But drama's all the emotions. So it's perfect because life is a drama. Life is a bunch of ups and downs and laughs and giggles and tears and fun times. But you die, that's your period. And then you go open source, and that's a comma or maybe a period. I don't know. You guys want to help us make it a comma? All right. All right, thank you. You can reach me at this email address, and I'm not kidding. Please, I say this every year. I say, email me, and no one does. Well, Travis does. Is Travis here? Yeah, Travis emails me all the time. You guys also email me. I like talking to Travis, but you guys too. Questions. Let's have some questions, concerns, feedback. You can even talk to me about my beard if you want. I'll explain it. I'll explain the beard. Come on, guys. You're going to email me and not ask questions? I prepared 30 minutes for you guys to ask questions. What's that?
What's your favorite board game?
Oh, okay. So my favorite board game of all time is called Terra Mystica. But I recently fell in love with a new board game called Age of Steam. Well, it's not new. It's from like 10 years ago. And it's ugly. It's like the worst looking board game in the world. So I spent a lot of nights and weekends redrawing the whole thing. So my copy of Age of Steam is way different than anything you can buy at the store. Because I couldn't play it anymore. Any other questions? Yes, Travis.
What are you currently working on redesigning with EE?
What am I currently working on redesigning with the, man. Do we have to have an open roadmap now? I don't know, can I talk about that stuff? Kevin, can I talk about that? We're going to add bulk uploader and a grid field that when you add files to it, it lets you have multiple files and you can change all of their metadata right in the entry. That's something that we're bringing out pretty soon. I don't know when exactly. File manager in general, we want to work on. Well, I'm not working on anything specifically today, though. I'm doing this. What do you want me to work on? How's that? Is that a better question? You tell me what to work on, and I'll go do it right now.
Multiple fields in one row.
Okay, so I have a secret for you. That's already in the app. We just don't let you do it. The code is there. The markup is there. But you can't actually do anything with it because it needs the layout manager. So the layout manager for channels is going to have a lot more features, and it's going to allow you to put stuff side by side, and it's going to allow you to do individual instructions for each of those fields. Because now that we have the situation where you can have one field and use it in a bunch of different channels, we want you to be able to label that field in whatever way you want. You'll also be able to mark a field as required in the channel manager or in the layout manager, but that's not there yet. But the markup is there because I work ahead of everybody else, and I'm not splitting the CSS up and stuff. So you can actually do it, but you have to hack the view files if you want. Yes.
How about being able to create layouts for guests on the front end? So when you use a
No, channel
fields
form.
loop for a channel form, we can do that and actually control the way.
Channel form is a weird beast. So the problem with channel form is that right now, and you guys know this, it's very strict on what can be done with it because the styles and the JavaScript are kind of like intertwined, and we haven't gotten to the point where we've had enough priority on that feature to be able to split that up the way it's supposed to. In the repo, we have that ready to go. We just haven't been able to implement it yet. In terms of being able to, I feel like that's kind of free form territory a little bit, having more control over that form. And that's kind of a big module. And channel form's sort of not really intended for that. It's more, a lot of people have been using it, I guess, to recreate CP forms on the front end. And that's kind of what it's intended for, but it's not intended to be a robust version of recreating those. Does that make sense? I'm not saying we won't do that or that's not something we'd be willing to do. I'm just saying we're not working on that right now. Does that make sense? Yeah. But please email me all of that information because the more information I have, and if anybody else thinks that's a good idea, email me too. I like emails. Any more questions? Jace? Yeah.
Now that you use open source, how much of the control panel are we going to be able to mess up?
None of it. 0. I'm still a gatekeeper, man. I'm not going to let you mess it up. Here's what will happen, though. I'm going to give you a better style guide so that you can, and if you want to add to it, you can definitely try, and I will definitely review it, and I will be really kind about it. And I'll help you get it to a point where I can say, yeah, we'll pull that in. Is that fair?
Yeah.
All right. Good.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Dorothy.
Dorothy.
With regard to Ellis's takeover of the world, I was wondering what role responsive web design was going to have within the services you offer.
Responsive web design is everybody's responsibility. If people aren't doing responsive web design, they should be. And if we are going to offer any kinds of services, we would definitely make sure that responsive web design was part of whatever we delivered to you for front-end stuff. But I don't know that we're going to have, we haven't really discussed like the extent of our services, but I definitely wouldn't ever do any front-end for somebody that didn't include it being completely responsive. Because there's no reason to do static, unresponsive design anymore. I mean, we all have supercomputers in our pockets, right? Let me check. Mine's still old. The comma thing. Can you guys help with that? I would like to get a 10. Any other questions? Feedback? Concerns? All right, let's talk with the beard.